In 2009, a movie called Avatar came out, and as we all know, it went on to become the highest-grossing movie of all time. Fast forward 3 years later, John Carter comes out, and that gets the title of the biggest movie flop of all time. I never truly understood what the deciding factor was between these two because at their core they are very similar movies. They're both science fiction action blockbusters about veterans falling in love with different planets. So what I decided to do is compile a bunch of data from the biggest movie flops and the biggest movie successes at the box office, so we could find out why Avatar is such a hit and John Carter such a failure. Now, before I start dishing out the data, it's time for you guys to see what data I'm actually compiling so you could get a better idea of what I'm doing here. I have 12 categories I'm measuring each movie on, those movies being the 25 biggest hits and the 25 biggest failures. And those are the runtime, three genres which I thought best fit them, the studio, if it was a franchise, the MPAA rating, the budget, the medium, which is whether it's live action or animated, the IMDb rating, and the Rotten Tomatoes critic scores and audience scores. Okay, now that we've got the guidelines all set, it's time to start talking about the biggest moneymakers in Hollywood and what they have in common. The average runtime of one of these movies was 2 hours and 16 minutes. They had a budget of just over 200 million, an IMDb rating of 7.5, and critic and audience scores of 81 and 84% respectively. The most common genre was adventure, having 16 movies, followed closely with 15 action movies. Family and superhero movies were tied at 7, and for 6 there was a tie of sci-fi and fantasy movies. 5 dramas, 4 comedies, and 4 musicals. Only 2 were romances. There was 1 crime movie and 1 thriller. 17 of these movies were PG-13, 7 were PG, and 1 was rated R. They also had a pretty tight list of studios, mainly under Disney, with a few outliers. Moving on to the biggest failures, which had an average runtime of 1 hour and 54 minutes, a budget of 165 million, an IMDb score of 5.9, a Rotten Tomatoes critic score of 44% and 55 for the audiences. Genres were 19 for action and adventure, 8 for sci-fi and fantasy, and a 6 on comedies and family movies. There were 4 superhero movies and a whole hodgepodge of other genres in the 1 to 2 range. 5 of these movies were a pre-existing franchise, 8 of them weren't, 2 were remakes, and a whopping 10 of them were adaptations of some sort. 19 of these movies were in live action, and 6 were animated. 1 was rated R, 10 were PG, and 14 were PG-13. Now, before I start concluding stuff, I'm going to put some new predictions out there. Now, I originally thought that the new Superman film was going to be a big hit because of the recognizement of him and the amount of superhero flicks in the data. But then I realized that timing is also important. 2018 was the year when Aquaman grossed $1 billion, but now in 2025, a Captain America film was a disappointment in the box office. There's also the added unproven aspect of James Gunn's new DCU, so I decided to switch my focus towards Wicked Part 2. Just seeing the cultural impact of Wicked 1, which was massive and nearly grossed $1 billion on its own, I think Part 1 will gain some traction on streaming, and Part 2 will cross $1 billion at the box office. For the biggest movie flop this year, I'd put my money on Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Now don't get me wrong, I love the Mission Impossible films and will 100% be there for opening night for Final Reckoning. But the movie has an estimated budget of $400 million. Movies need to gross 2.5 times their budget just to break even. So Mission Impossible would have to gross $1 billion just to break even. Yeah, I'm sorry Paramount, but Mission Impossible isn't that big of a brand name, and even if it manages to gross $1 billion, it certainly wouldn't get any farther after that. Another movie I think will be a flop is Tron Ares. Again, don't get me wrong, I like the other Tron movies, but I've mostly forgotten about them, as is the case for a lot of the mainstream movie audience. And with the lack of people going to the movies these days, I just don't think it'll be that big of an event, and Ares will slip through the public consciousness and find a home on streaming. Now that we've got all our data in place, it's time to talk about what it actually means. There's hardly a difference in genres or studios, so those aren't the culprits. Runtime had a fairly nice promotion of 20 minutes, from the failures to the successes, which I attribute to the grander and more epic feel event movies that everyone had to see. By far the biggest surprise to me was how expensive the successes were compared to the failures, boosting up $40 million. Again, probably due to the event movie feel. Another big surprise and a heavy hitter was how many adaptations there were for the failures. 10. And not like famous books, the only stuff I knew were adaptations were the Jungle Cruise and Battleship movies, and I don't need to tell you why those are bad ideas. The failures also had a pretty big amount of new IPs, 8. While the successes had a few of these, they were mainly sequels and remakes. Bad timing can also make or break a film, because a lot of the failures were good movies that just happened to release in the early 2020s, and a lot of the superhero movies that were successes released around 2018, when the superhero craze was reaching full swing. Moving on to the biggest difference, which was the quality. The IMDb rating went down by 1.6, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes went down by 29%, and the critic score went down by a whopping 37. So what did we learn from it? Well, sequels sell, but we already knew that. I want to zero in on the quality. The successes are better movies overall, meaning studios have incentive to make great movies, so even if there is a death of originality, it's not the complete death of art. Great movies will still come out, and that's enough for me. And while sometimes great movies will flop, more often than not they succeed, and when they don't, they find recognition later down the line. Well, that's all I've got for today. If you like this video, I'd love it if you could give me a like, and if you really liked it, I'd love it if you could subscribe. Now, in the immortal words of Ferris Bueller, it's over now. Go home.